My name is Eleanor Vance, but in the circles where I live my life, I'm known simply by my rank. I'm 29 years old, a Major General in the United States Army. Tonight, however, I'm just Nora, sitting at a forgotten table in a simple black dress, watching my father hold court at his own retirement gala. He has never once acknowledged my career with anything but thinly veiled contempt, certain that I am a low-level soldier, an embarrassing detour from the family's legacy. He believes I'm wasting my life. Tonight, that carefully constructed illusion he holds so dear is going to detonate in the most public way imaginable. If you're listening to this story right now, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop a comment below. And if you believe in the power of standing in your own truth, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey of finding your voice, especially when the ones trying to silence you are your own family. Growing up in the Vance household was an exercise in perpetual competition, a game I was systemically programmed to lose. My father, Arthur Vance, was a titan in his world, a senior executive at Aegis Dynamics, one of the nation's premier defense contractors. His success was a fortress around him, built from the steel of his commanding presence and the fine wool of his designer suits. He made it implicitly clear to everyone he met that he was a man of consequence. For his children, or at least for his sons, he had a blueprint. My older brothers, Julian and Marcus, were afforded every conceivable advantage. There were private tutors for subjects they found difficult, prestigious summer internships handed down through my father's network, and formal introductions to men who held the keys to their future. My father architected their lives with the precision of a military strategist, molding them into polished replicas of himself. Julian went on to become a high-flying investment banker, while Marcus accepted a groomed position at Aegis Dynamics, beginning his careful ascent up the corporate ladder under our father's ever-watchful gaze. For me, his only daughter, my father's blueprint was far less intricate. Eleanor will marry well, he'd proclaim at stuffy corporate functions, a self-satisfied smile on his face while I stood beside him, my cheeks burning with a quiet, searing humiliation. She'll make some fortunate man a wonderful wife one day. This was the extent of his praise, the ceiling of his ambition for me. My mother, Helen, a woman whose own ambitions had long been subsumed by my father's, would try to soften his dismissiveness. "Your father just wants you to be happy, Nora," she'd whisper, her voice gentle, after one of the many excruciating family dinners where he'd spend hours grilling my brothers on their career trajectories, while I might as well have been a ghost at the table. He's from a different generation. But I knew, with the chilling certainty of a child who sees the truth, that it had nothing to do with his generation. It was a fundamental tenet of his worldview. Women, and most certainly his daughter, did not belong in the driver's seat. Even when I excelled, graduating as valedictorian of my high school class, he found a way to deflate the achievement. "That's nice, Eleanor," he'd said after my speech, his praise as faint as a distant echo. "But academia isn't the real world. We'll see how you manage when the challenges are real." The military, therefore, was not just off-script. It was a betrayal of his narrative. When I announced my acceptance and intention to attend West Point, he didn't just disapprove. He laughed, a full, booming laugh that echoed in the formal living room. "The military? You wouldn't last a month in basic training. You've always been too sensitive." I went anyway, and I didn't just survive basic training, I came alive. The rigid structure, the unwavering discipline, the unambiguous chain of command, it all resonated with a part of my soul that my father's world of corporate politics and veiled intentions had never touched. For the first time in my life, I was being judged purely on my performance, my leadership, my grit. My gender was irrelevant. My name was irrelevant. My ascent through the ranks was, by any measure, meteoric. By the age of 25, I had already reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, having distinguished myself in strategic planning for operations that saved hundreds of lives. My superiors saw in me a natural talent for logistics and crisis management, entrusting me with assignments of increasing gravity. At 29, I was promoted to Major General, becoming one of the youngest to hold the rank in modern military history. I was overseeing joint operations so sensitive that I couldn't speak of them to anyone outside a secure facility. And through it all, I kept the true nature of my success a secret from my family. It was a decision born of two truths: a fierce desire to prove my worth entirely on my own, and the painful, quiet acknowledgement that no matter what I achieved, it would never be the right kind of achievement for my father. The classified nature of my record made the deception easy to maintain. To them, I was just another soldier, a captain, or maybe a major, doing something vaguely admirable but ultimately unimpressive. My brothers, orbiting my father like planets around a sun, readily adopted his condescending view of my life, playing soldier, Julian would call it during our tense holiday gatherings. Marcus was marginally kinder, but no more enlightened. "You know, Dad just wants you to live up to your potential," he'd say, as if commanding thousands of troops and making decisions with geopolitical consequences somehow fell short. Over the years, I made sporadic, half-hearted attempts to bridge the chasm between us. I'd attend family events when my duties permitted, listening to my father's monologues about corporate conquests and nodding politely. But every conversation felt like walking in a circle, always ending at his profound disappointment in my life choices. "You could have been something at Aegis," he said during our last Christmas together, swirling brandy in a snifter. "I could have opened any door for you." I bit back the retort that I'd kicked open my own doors he couldn't even imagine. "I've opened my own doors, Dad," I replied, my voice tight. He just shook his head, a look of pity on his face. "Military service is a fine thing for some, Eleanor, but let's be honest. As a low-level officer, you're not exactly changing the world." I let him believe it. It was easier. If he knew the truth, he would either find a way to take credit for it or, more likely, diminish it. My success was my own private sanctuary, and I would not let him tarnish it. When the embossed invitation for his retirement dinner arrived, my first impulse was to send my regrets. Why willingly walk into another evening of passive-aggressive jabs and overt dismissals? But then my mother called, her voice pleading. "It would mean so much to him, Nora, even if he doesn't show it," she said. "And to me, please." So I requested leave, packed a civilian dress, and began the mental fortifications for an evening of pretending his opinion no longer had the power to wound me. I had faced down insurgents and hostile governments. I could handle one dinner. What I didn't foresee was that this night would not just be a challenge. It would be a reckoning that would change the very foundation of our family. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel was a symphony of corporate elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto dozens of tables cloaked in white linen, each centered with an artful arrangement of blue hydrangeas and cream roses. A string quartet played softly in a corner, their classical music a sophisticated wallpaper for the low hum of conversation among Aegis Dynamics executives and their elegantly dressed spouses. This was my father's kingdom, a perfect stage for him to receive the adulation he believed was his birthright after 35 years of service. I made a point of arriving late, slipping into the ballroom when the mingling was already at its peak. My simple, sleeveless black dress and understated jewelry were a stark contrast to the glittering diamonds and bold colors worn by most of the other women. My choice was deliberate, professional, but designed to be invisible. Tonight was not supposed to be about me. Eleanor, you came. My mother spotted me instantly, her face a mixture of relief and anxiety. She broke away from a group of women and rushed to embrace me. She looked stunning in a deep sapphire gown, but the stress of orchestrating this perfect farewell for my father was etched in fine lines around her eyes. "I told you I would," I said, returning her hug. "How is it all going?" "Oh, your father is in his element," she said, gesturing toward the center of the room. He stood there, a king in his court, surrounded by a circle of admiring colleagues. He's been waiting for Robert Morrison to arrive, the CEO. Apparently, he almost never comes to these things, but he made an exception for your father. I nodded, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Robert Morrison wasn't just the CEO of Aegis Dynamics. He was a retired 4-star general. We had met on several occasions, in secure briefing rooms where I was in full uniform. I highly doubted he would recognize me in this context, in a cocktail dress with my hair down, but the possibility was an unforeseen variable, a potential complication in my strategy of quiet endurance. "Your brothers are here, of course," Mom continued, guiding me through the throng. They both brought their partners. Julian and Marcus had indeed arrived in full force. Julian and his wife Amanda looked like they'd just stepped out of a catalog for luxury living. Marcus was there with his husband, David, a well-regarded architect. They were clustered near our father, laughing at some anecdote he was telling, the very picture of a perfect, successful corporate family. Nora, Marcus saw me first, using the childhood nickname I'd long since shed. "We weren't sure you'd actually make it." "The army let you have a night off, I see," Julian added with a trademark smirk, his eyes flicking over my simple dress. "No uniform tonight, little sister?" "We're not required to wear them to family events, Julian," I said, my voice level as I accepted his perfunctory air kiss. "Dad's been practicing his speech all week," Marcus informed me, his tone implying this was a feat of great dedication. "The CEO is presenting him with some kind of lifetime achievement award." "That's wonderful," I said, dredging up a smile. Despite everything, a small, stubborn part of me still wanted to feel happy for him. He had worked relentlessly his entire life, even if his ambition had left a trail of emotional wreckage in its wake. Eleanor. My father had finally noticed me and was making his way over, accepting handshakes and backpats as he moved. He looked every bit the distinguished retiree in his custom tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. "I'm surprised you could get leave for something as trivial as your old man's retirement." The barb was wrapped in a smile, a piece of good-natured ribbing for the benefit of onlookers. Only our family would hear the sting beneath it. "I wouldn't have missed it, Dad," I replied, matching his public facade. "Congratulations." He gave a curt nod, accepting my words as his due. "You remember Patricia from accounting? Her son just became a lieutenant, Robert Jackson. Maybe you know him?" This was one of his favorite pastimes, assuming the entire military was a small town where I surely knew everyone, rather than an organization of over 1 million active duty personnel. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," I said diplomatically. "Well, I'm sure he outranks you by now anyway," Dad chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder before turning his attention to a more influential guest who had just arrived. I made my way to my designated seat. It was at a table in the very back of the room, as far from the head table as one could be without being in the kitchen. The seating chart was a clear map of the family hierarchy. Julian and Marcus and their partners were at the head table with our parents. I was relegated to a table with distant cousins, and a few junior Aegis employees who looked mortified to be seated with the boss's daughter. "Eleanor Vance, is that really you?" A warm voice cut through my reverie. I looked up into the kind eyes of Carol Fletcher, my mother's dearest friend, and one of the few people from my parents' world who had always treated me with genuine interest. "Aunt Carol," I said, standing to give her a hug. She wasn't a real aunt, but the title felt more real than most of my actual family connections. "I didn't know you'd be here," your mother insisted, she said, taking the seat next to me. "And besides, I wouldn't miss the chance to see Arthur try to act humble for a whole evening. It promises to be a spectacular performance." I laughed, a real unforced laugh. Carol had always seen right through my father's carefully polished armor. "You look wonderful, dear," she said, her gaze analytical. "The military life suits you, more than your father would ever care to admit." "It's been a good fit," I acknowledged, keeping my tone light. "Better than he knows, I suspect," Carol said with a knowing glint in her eye. "My nephew works at the Pentagon. He speaks very highly of a certain young female general who's been making waves." Before I could formulate a response, the sharp clinking of a glass against a microphone echoed through the ballroom. The formal part of the evening was beginning. The CEO had arrived. During the cocktail hour, I had watched my father navigate the room with the practiced ease of a career politician. He shook the right hands, laughed at the right jokes, and accepted every compliment with a performance of practiced humility. He never once came back to my table or attempted to introduce me to a single one of his colleagues. It was as if, having checked the box of my attendance, he could now file me away for the rest of the night. My mother, bless her heart, made periodic trips to my table, a visible tug-of-war playing out on her face between her duties as the perfect hostess and her maternal guilt. "Your father is just a bit on edge about his speech," she offered as an excuse during one visit. "You know how much tonight means to him." I did. This gala was the culmination of his life's work, a monument to his own importance. What I didn't know yet was that it would also become the stage for my own unwilling debut. The dinner service progressed with the clockwork precision of a major military operation. Salads were served and cleared, steaks, cooked to a perfect medium rare, or pan-seared sea bass were delivered according to preferences submitted weeks prior. Wine flowed, and with it, conversations grew louder and more relaxed. By the time dessert plates were being cleared, a comfortable, self-congratulatory buzz filled the air. Finally, Robert Morrison, the CEO of Aegis Dynamics and former four-star general, rose from the head table to begin the presentations. He was an imposing figure, even in a tuxedo, tall, broad-shouldered, with the ramrod-straight posture that military life drills into a person's very bones. I instinctively slouched a little lower in my chair, turning my face slightly away from the stage. I had briefed General Morrison several times in classified settings, and while the odds of him recognizing me out of uniform and in this environment were slim, I wasn't one to take unnecessary risks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention without needing to be raised, "we are gathered tonight to honor a man of extraordinary vision, a leader who has been instrumental in shaping Aegis Dynamics into the global powerhouse it is today." What ensued was a glowing 15-minute tribute to my father's career. Morrison lauded his strategic insights, his mentorship, and his unwavering dedication. He spoke with what sounded like genuine admiration, and for a moment, I saw a version of my father I rarely encountered. The respected professional, the leader admired by his peers. "And now," Morrison concluded, "I would like to invite Arthur Vance to the stage to say a few words and to accept this token of our profound appreciation for his 35 years of exceptional service. The room erupted in a standing ovation. My father strode to the podium, embraced Morrison, accepted a large crystal plaque, and turned to face the audience with the easy confidence of a man born to be in the spotlight. "Thank you, Robert, for those incredibly generous words," he began. "And thank you all for being here to celebrate not just my retirement, but the remarkable journey we've all shared at Aegis." He started with the requisite humility, thanking his mentors and colleagues. He spoke eloquently, as always, mastering the delicate balance between pride in his own achievements and acknowledging the team that supported him. But no career, however successful, is truly complete without the unwavering support of family, he continued, his voice softening into a more intimate tone. He turned to my mother. "To Elizabeth, my wife of 35 years, the woman who stood by me through every corporate battle, who created a home of warmth and love, and who has been my true north through it all. I could not have done any of this without you." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin as the room applauded her. I felt an unexpected sting behind my own eyes. Theirs was a solid partnership, even if I'd always quietly resented my mother's deference to my father's antiquated views. "And to my sons," my father went on, gesturing to Julian and Marcus. "Julian, who has forged his own path in the cutthroat world of finance, demonstrating a drive I like to think he inherited from me. And Marcus, who chose to join the family business at Aegis and has already proven himself a tremendous asset, rising on his own merits, despite the long shadow I'm sure I cast." More applause. My brothers beamed, their partners looking on with pride. I braced myself. I knew what was coming. I had rehearsed this exact moment in my mind. He would give me a brief, obligatory mention, acknowledge my admirable service with a hint of paternal confusion, maybe make a light joke about me choosing a life so different from the family business. I had prepared myself to offer a polite, tight-lipped smile and accept the crumbs of his approval with grace. What I had not prepared for was to be served up as the evening's sacrificial lamb. "I am so proud to have such talented children," my father said, a wave of satisfaction washing over his face. Then his eyes found me at the back of the room, and his expression shifted. Perhaps it was the wine, or the intoxicating effect of the crowd's adoration. Or perhaps it was simply decades of simmering disappointment finally boiling over. "Well, most of them anyway," he added, a jovial smirk playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. My daughter, Eleanor, chose a different path, military service. Admirable in theory. The room grew quiet, sensing the sudden, sharp change in tone. "She's here somewhere," he continued, scanning the tables dramatically until he located me. "Ah, there she is. Eleanor, stand up. Let everyone have a look at you." My blood ran cold. Trapped, I slowly rose to my feet, my face a mask of neutrality, while a hornet's nest of humiliation and rage swarmed in my stomach. "Eleanor joined the army some years back," he announced to the room, "some sort of low-ranked position. What is it now, Nora? A corporal? A sergeant?" "I prefer not to discuss my rank at civilian functions, Dad," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. He waved my response away with a dismissive hand, always so secretive about her little military career. As if anyone here would understand or care about the difference between all those stripes and patches anyway. A few people laughed, an uncomfortable, hesitant sound. I remained standing, my face on fire, but my spine military straight. "You know, Eleanor," my father continued, emboldened, "perhaps it would be best if you excused yourself. The rest of us will be discussing some rather complex defense contracts after this. We wouldn't want you to be embarrassed trying to keep up. After all, following orders is one thing, but strategic thinking is quite another." The room fell into a dead, shocked silence. My mother's face was ashen. Even my brothers looked horrified by the sheer cruelty of the public attack. I stood frozen, years of discipline, the only thing holding me upright. "Arthur," my mother finally said, her voice a sharp crack in the silence, "that is enough." My father seemed to dawningly realize he'd gone too far. He cleared his throat. "Just a bit of family humor," he said, the excuse landing with a thud. "Eleanor knows I respect her choices, even if they are unconventional." I didn't know that at all. I gathered my small clutch from the table. "If you'll excuse me," I said quietly, "to no one in particular. I think I'll get some air." I turned and began the long walk toward the exit. Head held high, each click of my heels on the marble floor an indictment in the suffocating silence. I had almost reached the doors when a voice, sharp and commanding, stopped me cold. "Wait just a moment." General Robert Morrison had stepped away from the head table and was looking at me. His eyes narrowed in concentration. "Miss Vance," he said, his gaze piercing. "We have met before, have we not?" I turned slowly, every eye in the room now fixed on this bizarre new development. "Yes, sir," I acknowledged. "We have." Morrison took a step closer, a flicker of recognition dawning. "You're not... Good Lord, you are Major General Eleanor Vance, aren't you? Commander of the Joint Strategic Operations Task Force." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. On the stage, my father's face had gone the color of chalk. The crystal plaque slipped from his grasp, but he didn't seem to notice. The microphone, however, fell from his other hand, hitting the stage with a deafening boom that echoed through the silent ballroom. The screech of microphone feedback was the only sound in the cavernous room, a high-pitched wail that perfectly underscored the collective shock. General Morrison, every inch the military commander despite his civilian suit, stood before me, his expression shifting from mild confusion to absolute certainty. "It is you," he stated, not as a question but as a confirmation. "Major General Eleanor Vance. I didn't recognize you out of uniform. Years of crisis management training took over my nervous system." I stood taller, my voice clear and calm. "Yes, sir. It's good to see you again." My father was still frozen at the podium, his mouth agape, the fallen microphone lying at his feet like a casualty of war. The immaculate corporate image he had spent a lifetime crafting had just been shattered, revealing the stunned, bewildered man beneath. Morrison turned to face the silent, gaping audience. His voice, honed by years of command, needed no amplification. "Ladies and gentlemen, I seem to have the unexpected and distinct honor of informing you that we have a true American hero in our midst tonight. Major General Eleanor Vance is one of the youngest generals in modern U.S. military history and the commander of operations so classified I cannot even name them in this room." A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see my brothers, Julian and Marcus, exchanging looks of utter bewilderment, their minds visibly struggling to process this new reality. "General Vance," Morrison continued, placing a deliberate emphasis on my rank, "was instrumental in developing the strategic initiatives that have, quite literally, altered the course of modern warfare. Her logistical innovations during Operation Desert Anchor saved countless American lives. Her leadership during the Black Sea standoff averted what would have been a catastrophic international conflict. Each word, each accolade, landed like a body blow on my father. He had finally managed to retrieve the microphone, but he just stood there, holding it, unable to speak. My mother was now on her feet, a hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, whether they were tears of shock, pride, or a chaotic mix of both, I couldn't tell. Morrison turned back to me, extending his hand. "It is a genuine honor to see you again, General. Though I must confess, this is the last place I ever expected to run into you." I shook his hand firmly. "Arthur Vance is my father, sir." "Your father?" Morrison's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. He glanced from me to the shell-shocked man on the stage. I had no idea. He never mentioned. "It's not common knowledge," I explained, my voice even. "I've always preferred to keep my professional and personal lives separate." By now, several other guests were on their feet. An Air Force colonel I had worked with on a joint task force, a woman named Davies, approached with a respectful nod. "General Vance, I didn't realize you'd be here." "Family obligation, Colonel," I replied simply. One by one, the other military personnel scattered throughout the room began to gravitate toward me, officers who had served under my command, a Pentagon official I'd briefed just weeks ago. In a stunning reversal, my father's retirement party was transforming into an impromptu military reception, with me at its epicenter. The balance of power in the room hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. My father, the man who had commanded the absolute respect of everyone present just 10 minutes ago, now stood alone and forgotten on the stage. All eyes were on the daughter he had just tried to banish. My mother finally navigated the crowd and reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Nora," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you never tell us?" "It never seemed relevant, Mom," I said softly, but with a clear meaning. "My work speaks for itself. I didn't need family approval to validate it." The unspoken words hung in the air between us. "I didn't tell you because I knew he would never truly see it. He would diminish it or try to claim it as his own." Her eyes filled with a sad understanding. Julian and Marcus approached next, their faces a canvas of warring emotions, shock, embarrassment, and a dawning, reluctant respect. "Major General?" Julian repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. "That's, what, 2 stars?" "Yes," I confirmed. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How long have you been a general?" "I received my first star at 26, I told them. The second came last year." 26? Julian looked like he'd been punched. Is that normal?" "No," Colonel Davies interjected, stepping forward slightly. "It's virtually unprecedented. Your sister is something of a legend at the Pentagon. I watched them struggle to tear down the narrative they had built around me for years. Their little sister playing dress-up, the one who took the easy way out, and replace it with the truth that now stood before them. Throughout this, my father had remained on the stage. Finally, as if remembering his role, he cleared his throat, the sound booming from the recovered microphone. "I think," he said, his voice shaky and uncertain, "we should continue with the program." But no one was listening. The social geography of the room had redrawn itself around me. Morrison turned back to my father, a wry, challenging look on his face. "I think, Arthur, that the evening has taken a rather unexpected turn. Perhaps you'd like to revise your earlier assessment of your daughter's service?" The challenge was unmistakable. A deep, mottled red flush crept up my father's neck. For the first time in his life, Arthur Vance was being publicly dressed down, tasting the exact same humiliation he had so casually inflicted upon me just moments before. Of course," he stammered. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. I was not aware of Catherine's position." "Major General," Morrison corrected him sharply. "Commanding strategic operations that shape our national security. Not the sort of detail a father typically overlooks." The rebuke was delivered with surgical precision. My father had no defense. He just nodded mutely and finally stepped away from the podium, rejoining my mother, who gave him a look that promised a very, very long conversation later. As for me, I felt a dizzying mix of vindication and profound discomfort. I had never wanted this. My work required discretion. Now, my two worlds had collided in the most spectacularly awkward way imaginable. "If you'll all excuse me," I said, addressing the circle that had formed around me. "I believe I will step outside for a moment." Morrison nodded in understanding. "Of course, General. We've disrupted your evening." As I walked toward the terrace doors, I passed my father. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. His were stunned, lost. Mine were steady. And in his gaze, for the first time in my life, I saw it. Respect, laced with a healthy dose of fear. It wasn't the relationship I had ever wanted with him, but it was the start of something new. The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome shock to my system. I leaned against the cold stone balustrade overlooking a manicured garden, taking a deep, shuddering breath. My entire relationship with my family had just been rewritten, the wall between my two lives demolished in a single explosive moment. There was no going back. The terrace door opened behind me, and Colonel Davies appeared, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "Thought you might need this, General," she said, offering one to me. That was quite the scene. I accepted the glass with a grateful nod. Not exactly how I planned my night. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "We're off the clock, Davies. Call me Eleanor." "Right," she said, taking a sip. "So your father really had no idea? None of them?" "None," I confirmed. "It just seemed simpler." "Simpler," she repeated, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "With all due respect, Eleanor, there is nothing simple about hiding the fact that you're one of the most accomplished generals of your generation from your own family." I just shrugged, unwilling to unpack a lifetime of complicated family dynamics for her. "What's happening in there?" "General Morrison is holding court, regaling everyone with tales of your strategic genius. Your father looks like he might faint. Your mother is alternating between crying and looking like a proud lioness. And your brothers are doing that thing men do when they realize a woman they've patronized is actually leagues above them." "Sounds delightful," I said dryly. The door opened again. This time it was my mother. Her eyes were red, but her posture was resolute. "Colonel," she acknowledged with a nod. "May I have a moment alone with my daughter?" "Of course, Mrs. Vance," Davies said, her military discipline snapping back into place. "General, I'll see you inside." When we were alone, my mother and I stood in a heavy silence. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice a raw whisper. "Why would you keep this from me?" "Would it have made a difference, Mom?" I countered, my voice gentle but firm. "If Dad knew I was a general, would he have seen me differently? Or would he have just found another metric by which I failed to measure up?" She flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Look at what happened tonight. For my entire adult life, I have listened to him dismiss my career. He was content with his version of me because it fit his worldview." "He is proud of you," she insisted, but the words lacked conviction. "He has trouble showing it." "He's proud of the idea of me he wanted," I corrected. "He had no trouble showing his pride in Julian and Marcus tonight." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached for my arm. I should have asked more. I should have pushed back harder against him. "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." Tears welled in her eyes again, but she blinked them away. "Your father is in shock. He wants to talk to you." I considered it. Part of me wanted to let him stew in the public humiliation he'd created. But that was petty. "Where is he?" "In the hotel manager's office." I nodded. "I'll talk to him." "But Mom, this doesn't fix everything. One conversation won't erase years of disrespect." "I know," she said softly, "but maybe It can be a start. We walked back into the ballroom. The atmosphere was still thick with the evening's drama. General Morrison was now deep in conversation with my brothers, who were listening with rapt attention. My father was nowhere to be seen. The manager escorted us down a quiet service corridor to an office. Mom squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to come in?" I shook my head. This needs to be between him and me. I took a breath, knocked once, and entered. My father was standing by the window, his back to me, still holding the crystal plaque. It looked like an artifact from another lifetime. "Dad," I said, "Mom said you wanted to see me." He turned. The confident executive was gone, replaced by a man who looked older, smaller. "Eleanor," he said, his voice subdued. I didn't know." It was the closest to an apology he'd ever come. "You never asked," I replied, without malice. It was just a fact. He set the plaque down on a desk. "Would you have told me if I had?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Probably not at first. But maybe. Eventually. If I believed you were genuinely interested and not just looking for a new way to tell me I wasn't as successful as my brothers. He flinched but didn't deny it. "Major General," he said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "That's significant." "Yes," I agreed. "It is, and you did this all on your own." It wasn't a question, but I heard the one beneath it. "Did you use my name?" "My service record is classified," I told him. "But yes, it was entirely on merit. In fact, I went out of my way to avoid any association with Aegis Dynamics to prevent even the perception of a conflict of interest." He nodded slowly. I don't know what to say. "Congratulations feels inadequate, and I'm sorry. Would be a start," I finished for him. He drew himself up, a flicker of his old pride returning. "I was wrong," he conceded. "I made assumptions about your career that were incorrect. It wasn't the apology I deserved, but it was more than I had ever gotten." "Yes," I said, "you did." We stood in another silence. "We should go back," he said finally. "I have a retirement to celebrate, apparently." The attempt at humor fell flat. "Yes, we should." "And Dad? Yes? When we go back out there, please don't try to take credit for this. My success is not an extension of yours. It's mine." A flash of his old defensiveness crossed his face, then gave way to a weary acceptance. "Understood," he said, and for the first time, it felt like he meant it. The rest of the evening was a surreal performance of strained cordiality. General Morrison insisted I join the head table, a gesture of honor that was also a subtle, final rebuke of my father. I sat between my mother and General Morrison, answering polite questions from my father's colleagues, who were now desperate to make my acquaintance. The drive to my parents' house was silent. My mother had insisted on a family debrief, and for once, my father hadn't argued. We gathered in the formal living room, a space reserved for important guests, which underscored the gravity of the moment. "I think we need to address tonight," my father began, defaulting to his role as chairman of the board. "There's clearly been a miscommunication." "A miscommunication?" Julian cut in, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Dad, you publicly humiliated her, and it turns out she's a 2-star general. That's a bit more than a miscommunication." I felt a flicker of surprise and gratitude. "She chose not to share that information," Dad said defensively. "And why do you think that is, Arthur?" my mother asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Why would our daughter feel she had to hide her incredible life from her own family?" My father looked at me, his confusion genuine. "I don't know." I finally spoke, my voice calm. "I kept it from you because I knew, no matter what I did, it would never be the right kind of success." I didn't want my career, which I built on my own, to be subjected to the same dismissive judgment you've applied to every other part of my life. The truth landed in the silent room. That's not fair, my father protested, but the words were hollow. No, Dad, it is, Michael said softly. You've always held Nora to a different standard. Lower expectations and less interest, we all saw it. And none of you said anything? Dad shot back, looking betrayed. I did, my mother said, many times. You always said I was being too sensitive. My father fell silent, finally outmaneuvered. My mother stood and came to me, taking my hands. Eleanor, I am so sorry. I should have done more. I should have been a stronger advocate for you. I failed you, and I am deeply, deeply sorry. Her sincerity was a balm on a very old wound. Thank you, Mom, I whispered. My father watched us, then leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, a posture of defeat I'd never seen. Why the military, Eleanor? He asked, and for the first time, it sounded like a real question. With your mind, you could have done anything. Because in the military, I explained, I am judged on my merit. My gender is secondary. My last name is irrelevant. Every promotion, every responsibility has been earned. And the work matters, Dad. Not in terms of market share, but in terms of human lives. There's a clarity of purpose in that I never found in your world. He nodded slowly. I never looked at it that way. I know, I said. A long silence passed. Finally, he stood and walked over to me. Eleanor, he said formally, I owe you an apology, a real one. I was wrong. I let my own biases blind me to the extraordinary woman you have become. I am sorry, and I would like the chance to do better. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I looked into his eyes and saw not a corporate titan, but just a father confronting his own failures. Thank you, Dad, I said. I'd like that too. He extended his hand and I took it. It wasn't a hug, but it was a treaty, a beginning. 3 months later, I stood in my full-dress uniform at a ceremony marking my promotion to Lieutenant General. The third star was a recognition of my leadership during a crisis that had unfolded in the weeks following my father's retirement. In the front row sat my mother, her eyes shining with pride. Beside her, looking slightly awkward but present, was my father. Julian and Marcus were there too. The weeks after the dinner had been filled with tentative phone calls and carefully worded emails. But slowly, things had changed. My mother had found her voice. My brothers had started treating me like a peer, even asking for leadership advice. My father was learning. As General Morrison pinned the third star to my shoulder and my family applauded, I felt a sense of wholeness that had been missing from my entire adult life. Afterward, at a small reception, my father approached me. I'm proud of you, Eleanor, he said quietly. Genuinely proud. Not because of the rank, but because of the leader you are. I was wrong. The words were simple, but they were everything. Thank you, Dad, I said. That means more than you know. My mother joined me, a small smile on her face. He's been reading military history, she confided. Biographies of female generals. He's trying, in his own way, to understand your world. Later, as my family prepared to leave, my father hesitated. Your mother and I were thinking, maybe you could join us for dinner, once a month, when you can, just family. It was more than a dinner invitation. It was an offer for a new beginning. I'd like that, I said. As I watched them go, I realized the heavy burden of being misunderstood by my own family had finally begun to lift. The courage to be fully seen, with all your flaws and all your triumphs, is perhaps the greatest bravery of all. In standing in my truth that night, I hadn't just reclaimed my own dignity, I had given my family the chance to finally know me. Have you ever had to stand up for your own path against your family's expectations? How did you navigate that difficult moment? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder that your worth is not defined by other people's opinions. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most important expectations to exceed are always your own.